If you struggle with anxiety, this video is a must watch for you. This is the one thing you need to understand to change your relationship with anxiety. Go watch it now. Hey there, my name is Diana Garcia. I'm a licensed therapist in Florida and owner of a private practice called Nurturing Minds Counseling. This is part of my Decoding Anxiety series. Go check out the playlist here. Go watch those videos before you jump into this video. All right, let's jump into this week's video. I've talked about the role of avoidance related to anxiety in other videos, but in this video, I really want to dedicate more time to it so you really understand what the cycle of avoidance is, how it's not really helpful when it comes to changing your relationship with anxiety, and then help you understand maybe what you need to start to look at so you can change this. Okay, so what do I even mean when I talk about this cycle of avoidance or just avoidance in general? So clearly when you have an anxious response, right, when you're having these thoughts, the feelings, the physical sensations, and then you do something, your behavior, right? Typically, one response is that you choose to avoid the situation that's bringing on this anxious response, right? Hence avoidance. Now, I've just mentioned this many times before. We all engage in avoidance at times. Avoidance in general isn't necessarily bad. It's just noticing when it's a consistent pattern and when it's starting to really backfire on you. With anxiety, so really it's helpful to look at this model that I have here on the screen. So if something triggers your anxiety, whatever that cue is, external or internal, you can check out my Understanding Anxiety Disorders video here to understand related to a specific disorder what could be potential things that would trigger your anxiety. I'll just stick with a simple example of social anxiety. So someone invites you to a party, so that triggers your anxiety. And then you can see that you experience a range of discomfort when you think about going to this party or how you're going to respond. Maybe there's like thoughts of like, I don't know if I could do it. What if I look weird or awkward? Or man, maybe you think about the last time you went to a party and it didn't go well. What are you going to say? How are you going to handle that? What if people just know that you're so anxious, right? So all of that is the thought component. And maybe when you start thinking about that, you just start noticing these physical symptoms. Maybe you start noticing you get really hot or you're sweating or your heart's just starting to beat a little bit faster, right? Again, another component of the anxious response. Maybe you start just noting, again, that feeling of fear, anxiety starting to show up. And maybe there's other feelings that come with it. Maybe there's some shame that this is showing up for you. Maybe there's some disappointment, embarrassment, whatever the case is, right? But there's that feeling emotional component as well. Okay, so again, this is the part that's really crucial. In that moment, let's say you're having this experience, and avoidance is you make the decision not to go to the thing that triggers your anxiety. So in this example, you make the decision not to go to the event, or you just decline right away, or maybe you say you're going to go, but the day of the event, all that anxiety feels so overwhelming and you just can't get yourself to get in the headspace to go. So in that moment, the moment you decide not to go, this really powerful thing happens where you get instant relief. Like you start to feel like, oh my gosh, that's not going to happen. I feel better. And you physiologically feel that. But this is the thing, depending on you or depending on how long it lasts, that piece, right, of that short-term discomfort, maybe right after, maybe shortly after, the day after, you start to feel really bad because you missed out on something that you wanted to do. In this case, right, this wouldn't even cause you anxiety if social events weren't important to you. Typically, the things that matter to us are what triggers our difficulties. So you start to feel bad that you couldn't go, and maybe that triggers a whole other cycle of just shame and whatnot. But this other piece is that what you're doing in the short term is that you are getting that relief in exchange for missing out on the opportunity to learn to do something different. So ultimately, you reduce your tolerance for anxiety. And so it's like you are not giving yourself the ability to go exercise this muscle of being social. I want to point out when it comes to anxiety overall, it really becomes problematic when one, you're not willing to have it, right? When it shows up, you close the door, you look the other way, you're just not willing to be in that experience, right? So when it shows up, right, and of course we all have moments when we experience this, you do a lot of efforts to avoid it, to suppress it, to keep it down, right? That's the other thing. So you engage in a lot of avoidance, emotional suppression. 3, it's when you really have a cost associated with that, right? Whether it's time or energy or just, the cost of missing out on things that are important to you. So this is the thing, over time, anxiety starts to control your life. It's the one that's making decisions in your life, not you, from a place of what's meaningful to you. And it starts to shrink your life, right? So remember when I gave the explanation of agoraphobia in the other video, it's really that over time, you might even get to the point in those cases, if you have that type of disorder, where you stop leaving your house, right? And it might not have started like that from the bat. It might have been like you slowly, your anxiety starts kind of invading other territories, right? It convinces you like, well, you don't need to do certain events or certain things. Well, okay, fine. I can let that one go. Not big cost. But then it's the other thing, the next thing that triggers your anxiety. Okay, well, you can avoid that. Okay, and so you can notice how it starts to do that, and then it really starts to shrink your life. So when I'm working with someone with an anxiety disorder, it's helpful to have this model, because then we understand, one, what's happening internally for that individual. Like, this is really helpful. Like, if you're understanding your relationship with anxiety, this model, and you can like just take a screenshot of it, is going to be helpful for you to shift the relationship. Because one, you can start to understand what are the triggers, right? What are your triggers for anxiety? They can be external or they can be internal. And that's the other thing, especially with like someone with generalized anxiety disorder, or even to a certain degree with obsessive compulsive disorder. Really, it could be the internal thoughts that can be the trigger, which I know can feel counterintuitive, but your mind can give you something, and then that becomes the kind of the stimuli for anxiety. And then you do other things to avoid it. And even to a certain degree, there's this perspective that worrying, thinking about it over and over and over, also becomes an avoidance mechanism, because instead of just making room for the discomfort, uncertainty, whatever shows up in that moment, you just keep trying to like think, figure it out, worry, plan, see if eventually you'll come to something that will remove you from having to just sit with this discomfort. This other piece, like you experience a range of sensations or discomfort, that's another important part, because then that's going to lead you to understand what is showing up for you internally that you have such a reaction to, and then what skills do you need to build, right? Typically with someone with anxiety, it really might be like the thoughts, right? Those thoughts that show up. There's some core fears that are coming up for you. And when I say core fears, and I'll talk about this in another video, it's really not just the initial thought, but like when you start digging and digging and digging, there's like a core fear that might be showing up regardless. Like when we think of different triggers, like if we still dig and dig and dig, there's this fear, that core fear, that's really what we have to notice and learn how to respond differently to. Also, like the physical sensations, right? So when we think of exposure work, it's helping a client learn, at least from an ACT perspective, learn how to be with that experience and respond flexibly and in a different way, right? And so exposure can look like, putting yourself in a situation where those feelings or physical sensations might show up. So someone who works from this lens really will encourage in sessions, like you guys will gradually start to do exercises in the session that will make those physical sensations show up. So like whether it's like running in place, if you need to get that sense of breathlessness, or your heart beating fast, or breathing through a straw, or again, just spinning in a chair if you just need to feel dizzy, right? Whatever physical sensation that feels uncomfortable for you, you're going to start to try to bring it on so that you can practice responding differently. Again, that's another great place for you to understand your relationship with anxiety. Like, what are the physical sensations that get you? Because it's different for everybody. And then, of course, again, just knowing like if there's different feelings that show up for you in that moment, right? It's not just maybe anxiety or fear. It might be some shame, some disappointment, sadness, whatever the case is. Also thinking about like if your mind goes to these other places, whether it's like memories about past failures, or at least what your mind perceives as past failures, or very commonly like concern about the future and like imagining all these scenarios and how that hooks you. So this part's a really great way to understand what skills are lacking, or you just haven't practiced in a long time that you then need to beef up. Okay. And then this other part, and then again, it's like you are going to then slowly, if you really want to tackle your relationship with anxiety and change it, you have to start doing mini experiments. That's really what it is. Not only just like mini experiments in terms of bringing on these sensations, but you're going to have to then slowly start to make what we call like a hierarchy. So you're going to start to list things that typically or traditionally or at this point you've avoided and they cause you so much discomfort, or maybe you go but like you have a really, really hard time, and so you're going to really practice, right? And so you're going to list things that are important to you and you're going to slowly start to tackle them. Again, little experiments. And I always talk about experiments because the goal isn't to get it right or perfect. You're just going in with an open mind and trying to respond differently. Give a thumbs up if this understanding of avoidance and this just even picture graph was helpful for you. Give me a thumbs up now. Hopefully you have a better understanding of how avoidance does work in the short term, but not so much in the long term. And I hope you spend some time just jotting down or thinking about your triggers, the internal stuff that really is hard for you, which also means the skills that you can work on, and then maybe some ideas for things you could add to your hierarchy to start doing some mini experiments. Check out this video next on my Decoding Anxiety series, and as always, I encourage you to continue nurturing your mind, body, and soul, whatever that looks like for you. Thanks, guys.